and welcome back to the Renaissance Room podcast. Wow, so many revelations, so much to unpack here. First and foremost, I don't know why this has become like such a prevalent thing, but I'm just so like here for talking about church hurt. I can honestly say that being like in the world, and not even from like this religious standpoint, but more so like with culture and trends and human behavior and, considering sociology, humans are always shifting and adapting. Influence is real. We have an influence culture, right? It's become a huge marketing tactic, a huge marketing industry. So people are literally being paid to influence your minds, right? Like we seen the documentary that was with like Google and everything, and how they talked about like influence and how so much of it is just literally the click of a button. They get your address, they study the algorithm. And that was so funny to me because, I started to think about conversations and like even the style of writing and how writing was really kind of taking this toll, especially for Black authors, where there was almost like this pressure to speak up about oppression, and there was this pressure, or rather responsibility, to identify with marginalization, to speak about racism and things like that. And it was so funny to me because I noticed that there was a certain following and like a garnering of following that people got when they spoke about these topics. Now, I was really kind of taken back because I knew that there was some truth, and I knew that advocacy and all those things, like I'm here for it 100%. But I just started to wonder, at what point did we start to enable one another, and at what point did we start to coddle one another? One of the things I can say, speaking from my last podcast episode where I told you guys about that content creator, my biggest thing is that it's very clear to me that we have to realize the solution. And the solution is that we're all at the bottom, white, Black, poor, Hispanic, like it doesn't matter. Like if you're not at the tippity top cream of the crop, you're at the bottom. And it's not to say that like you're a peasant and you're undeserving or you're unworthy. It's more so just to like really gauge what's happening here. And when I talk about gauging what's happening here, it's more so realizing like, hey, there's a lot to unpack in American history, but at the end of the day, this is what remains. And so we're going to get along because we don't have a choice but to get along. There's not going to be a time where we're going to live on this earth without white or Black people. You know what I mean? At least not in this lifetime for anyone who's listening to this podcast. And I think for me, if you can understand that, then you can move forward and you can prevail and you can move onward and upward. I wanted to talk about church hurt really just because I found for myself through my spiritual journey, through everything, it's just one of those things to where, and it could be discomfort. Like I'm always really willing to kind of step back and look at myself. But I just think it's just something that concerns me about today's world when you let people hijack your spiritual practice, whatever that is for you, whether it be church, whether that be religion, whether that be spirit. And it's really sad because God is a spirit. We hear it all the time, Holy Spirit, right? But we always divorce like religion and Christianity from God's spirit. It's just a very interesting thing. But I just wanted to get on here and kind of like talk about that because I just think it's one of those things where I just noticed for so many people, if you're like alive today and you're living in the world and you're in this space, you're going to find yourself really, really tossed to and fro with the wind because people are letting go of so many of their morals, so many of the things that they've always believed in and their principles. Like you're going to have a really hard time standing on your beliefs because guess what? A lot of times what you believe, your truth or whatever, it may not be the thing that may be most profitable depending on your industry, right? Like I said, I talked about writing, how I just kind of noticed that writing had become one of those things where it was solely about speaking about African-American oppression. And though I was not opposed to that, I just felt like the work was very heavy. I felt like it was more so used to channel anger and frustration rather than to uplift and to encourage and enlighten and to really move our people forward. I talked about this in the Rites of Passage podcast episode where I said the only people who are qualified are those who are out here doing the work. I think that it's a really like waste of breath to do all this studying and never be able to apply what you're learning, to never ignite the passion within you that you may have for all the hours you're putting in, in this curriculum, and not do anything with that. Like, I just think that's such a waste of time. Like, why take all this energy, all this time, dedicate all these hours to studying African American history if you're not going to do something that can empower future generations? And that's kind of like my thing. So I think it's one of those things where it's like, it's a really tough thing. And I think when we talk about progression and we talk about the implementation of spirituality and healing work and things like that in the Black community, it's oftentimes shunned against different, religion practices sometimes, and against people who are just used to Black people kind of being seen in this really, really dark and negative light. So I sincerely believe that your spiritual practice is your own. Let your practice be your own. But one thing I will say, what I've learned for myself, and like I said, I talked about, it being one of those things where it's like, okay, it could be a little discomfort, tapping into the realm of like meditation and spiritual enlightenment and so forth. But I just think it's one of those things to where you got to find what grounds you, because one thing I know about this earth today and like just being on the world today is it's way too much motion. Like the clicks, the scrolls, the likes, everything. Like you have to figure out what your practice is for you and then keep it to yourself. You know what I mean? Like you don't really need to share that with anybody. And I wish somebody would have told me that. But so I'm telling you what I've learned in a very, very hard way, because I think God has a very unique way of communicating with all of us in our own individual way. So it's a very beautiful thing. And I think I remember I heard a pastor, or it could have been a motivational speaker, I don't know. I listened to a lot of those, right, interviews and so forth. But he said that, look at, or it could have been a woman, forgive me. It's one of those things where like he said that like your relationship with God, look at it like a personal relationship. And with that, it's like you don't go and tell every single person about y'all relationship, right? And I thought that was really, really profound. And at the time I didn't apply it because I was in that learning stage. But now I feel like life has kind of come full circle and I'm starting to apply the things that I've learned. So yeah, that's the first thing. The second thing I kind of want to talk about is this, the striving for a life of grandiosity. And this is really good because I see a lot of people who are online and they're being super, super critical of people who are in the high spaces. Now, don't get me wrong. I do think that you absolutely need a little bit of narcissism to become extremely successful, because there's going to be a lot of people who are just like, it's a lot of cards that are stacked against you, right? Like we know that like this is America, this is the land of opportunity. There are some things that you're going to have to overcome. However, it's not impossible. People have done it, right? You don't want to make yourself a victim per se, but there is some historical context in origins that reside on this land, in these roots. So with that being said, it's one of those things where it's like you have to realize it's going to be a lot, and you're going to have to really, really believe in yourself and know that you're competent and capable in doing what it is that you're setting out to do. I would say for myself, I've learned that I didn't even realize it at the time, but honestly, I'm tired. And it never clicked for me, because I just think that it's very unfortunate, but just working, continuously working, nothing ever being enough. I've really, really struggled to celebrate any accomplishment. I look at things as it's just merely a check off the box. I look at it like this is what I'm supposed to be doing, and quite frankly, it's really not enough. I could have did better. I could have gave that a little bit more, 105, right? We could have did 110 rather than 100%. That really wasn't enough. I'm not really someone who applies a lot of grace, to myself within my work ethic. And I think it's because when you have such high expectations for yourself, you don't really, I don't know. I just think it's one of those things where it's in your mind, it's a very hard thing for you to process, when you're doing your best and you're doing enough. So that's something that I'm working to overcome. And I can honestly say, being on this podcast, as much as I've deleted it and come back and so forth, it's probably been one of the most healing things for me, because first of all, I value sisterhood, I value community, but it's not something that's in my life currently. And I've always found myself when I'm in content creation mode, or when I'm just creating for my own sanity and so forth, it just kind of becomes my haven. And that was my entire thing with my podcast. I've always wanted to just be a haven for community, because I just don't think that we have everyone needs a haven, you know what I mean? And I felt like for me podcasting was my haven. As much as I talk, and it's so funny because as much as I talk, I don't really talk to that many people. You know, like if you know me, then you know that I'm someone who's talkative. But for the most part, even still, I think that I've known people for quite an amount of time in my life, and they've never really known me, you know. And that's a really tough thing. I actually think that's something I had just recently overcome with someone who was an old friend. We were friends for a very long time, but I never felt like this person really knew me. And it could be because I'm not really the type of person to like put myself on the front lines, you know, like if I'm kind of someone that's like, if you don't ask, I don't tell, you know. And it's not like I'm trying to play this like masquerading kind of game. It's more so just like, if you don't ask me, then I don't tell you. But I think it's because of the profundity of just the depth that I have within myself. And it's so crazy. I remember I had a friend in college, and you know, I remember she was just like, you're always trying to be so fake deep. And I was so crushed because at the time, you know, I was really vulnerable and so forth, and I just was like, oh, like, you know, I was just so shook. I couldn't believe she said that to me. But anyway, I think that probably also plays a role. But I think for myself, it's just one of those things where it's like, I don't know. I think that overall, I'm a pretty private person. And one of the things that I'm just learning as I'm getting older is just like, life is just one of those things to where it's like, no one's really coming to coddle you. And so I think you can have your issues. You can have all those things. I think that life and like healing and all those things, it really starts to become about getting in a space where it's like, you just kind of learn to deal with it, and like you work with whatever you got going on, you know what I mean? Whatever issues that you're dealing with, like, or, you know, the things that you've taken on from your life, the things that have shaped you, you know, in simpler terms, and you just learn to deal with it. And like, you just, that's who you are. And I think for me, that's more so the space that I was coming in. It was like, okay, I know Jalen. I know Jalen's modes, her mediums, and so forth. And I think that that's kind of what life becomes. I think that the constant journey of like healing and perfection, I just think it's never ending. And I think it kind of ties into just like, I don't know, it kind of like marketing, like something that just, you know what I mean? Like it's like an advertisement that essentially tells you that you're going to reach a certain point in your life where you're going to be different. You're going to be so just different than anything, you know what I mean? And do I think you can grow? Do I think you can be better? Absolutely. But I just think that like you take you wherever you go, and like you get better. Sure, you get, you know, circumstances change, you mature, you grow, you know, you get greater insights and perspectives, and you garner new wisdom as you grow older and so forth. But it's just one of those things where I just feel like at the end of the day, it's you. You know, so I do think that to an extent, the self-care, well, I don't want to say self-care because I believe in self-care now. It's something I believe in. But I do kind of feel like to an extent, the self-healing journey has kind of come a bit marketable. But let me just say this, because I feel like it depends on where you are in your life. You know, some people have been doing this work for a very long time, and like they're thinking that they're going to reach a certain point. And then you have some people who have just, they're not even on the road, you know, with no self-awareness. I'm not talking about those people. I think that it can make a huge difference. The other thing I want to talk about is anger and holding on to anger and frustration and all those different things. I found for myself, it's true, you know, forgiveness is one of those things where it's really about you. It's not really about the other person. And I found for myself, being in a state of forgiveness is just so freeing. And I really believe that forgiveness is something that it looks different for everybody. You know what I mean? I think a lot of people always kind of paint this picture, especially today, where it's like forgiveness has to be this thing where you're like rocking with the person and you're not bothered. Like, no, I'm at peace. I just don't deal with you, you know? And then the other thing that I wanted to kind of touch on is I wanted to talk about what happens when we cut everybody off, right? Because I think that outside of Instagram and the perfect pictures and the perfect body types and all these different things, I think that it's created the perfect person. And I just told you guys how I personally feel like at this point in my life, healing is really just about, okay, this is who I am. This is what I've been through. This is what I'm aware of. And I'm going to deal with this. And that's just what it is. And I'm going to go and live my life and I'm going to deal with this. But I think that social media has kind of created this perfect person. And I think that people have become so irrational in relationships to the point where I just wonder, like, what are y'all going to do when y'all cut everybody off? Like, what is about to be the solution? Because isolation, I'm telling you right now, it's so funny to me, because when I hear people talk about solitude and isolation, and though y'all know, like, it's okay. I get it. Like, you have seasons, you have moments. I even know for me, I have times where I need to just like unplug and recharge and just connect with myself and just, you know what I mean? But like, to live a life of solitude is very dangerous. I remember the studies that they did on monkeys, where they put them in like separate rooms, the documentaries in regards to like solitary confinement and the prison systems. Like, I'm not really sure if y'all, like, it's like we're glorifying things that are just not natural. And so I'm just wondering, like, what are people going to do, right, when we push this? And this is a very contradictory kind of like narrative in society, where we talk about solitude, but then we simultaneously will say, community matters, or, we won't say that, but we'll get on social media and we'll do the things to garner the likes and the follows and the attention, and we'll find community in these strangers. So it's like, it's very clear to me that human beings need connection. So I just want to know, what are we going to do when we cut everybody off? Now, do I think that there are some people who are absolutely dead wrong? Yes. But I just think that it kind of comes to a point where I just kind of feel like every motivational speaker, and I'm not even going to say every pastor, but quite a few pastors at this point, motivational speakers. Everyone who's kind of in the room with the platform, everyone's getting online talking about, this is why they don't like you. And that's why they was hating on you. And God's about to elevate you. And don't get me wrong, God will do that. God will exalt you. He says that, right? God is true. And it's like, we'll get in these spaces and it's like, you're listening to all of this and it's like, this is why they don't like you. Three ways your friends are a hater and so forth. And it's like, don't get me wrong. Like, are there some people like that out there? Absolutely. But I think one of the biggest discrepancies in the Black community is just always this I'm better than you mentality. And that just keeps us stuck. Like, oh my God, that's the thing that's going to take us out every time. That's going to reel us in every time. And I guess for me at this point, entering into like the writing space and the writing community as a Black writer, and I honestly, can I sidebar here? I can completely understand why Idris Elba said that he didn't want to be identified as a Black actor, because I just think that there's something in the Black community with the identification of Blackness that represents lack, that represents oppression, that represents scarcity, that represents deprivation. And it was like Black culture was only commodified outside of Black people, right? That's why you have so many people who are advocating against cultural appropriation, not because we want to necessarily nitpick over every white girl who wears braids, but it's because these things are only desirable and profitable outside of Black people. And at this point, I really believe that's why a lot of people are dating outside of their race, because for one, when you get with Black people, there's this sense of realism that, oh, there is a scarcity mindset here. There is a lack mindset here. There is deprivation here. And one thing I've realized is that Blackness can only be associated with ghetto, illiterate, dangerous, dramatic, outspoken, masculine, aggressive, intimidating, and Black. Right? And I completely understand why you have some people talk about, like, those who are educated who date outside their race and all these different things. Listen to me now, because we know that most Black men and Black women are oftentimes married to Black men. So the statistic is false. But when we step outside of that, we have to really start to acknowledge in our communities that, like, the only thing that Blackness can be associated with is those things. So when you're a Black girl or you're a Black man why did I say girl? When you're a Black woman or you're a Black man and you're educated, or let's just start with education, because I think that's a really big piece. And, God tells us that my people will perish for lack of knowledge. And this is probably one of those things that kind of tailors into that. And like, it's Bible, but it's also giving like African proverb, right? We know that Black people have been deprived and restricted from literacy. And it's even still interesting. I talked about this, how this is actually still something that's going on today, how they're book banning and so forth. So anyway, move forward. when you're educated, when you're poised, when you're classy, when you're not feeding into the stereotypical images of the hypersexualization of a Black man or a Black woman in your own kind of like caricature, you're not seen as desirable to Black people. That, at this point, girl, I should have put that on the video. We need to be on YouTube, because that's tea. Like, when you're someone who's educated, when you're someone who's well-mannered, when you're someone who is respectful, that's not attractive. That's not seen as desirable as in a Black person. So those traits, such as like intelligence and so forth, where is that oftentimes valued? In white spaces, in white communities, right? So that is why I believe people date outside their race, because Blackness, if we're not careful, if we're not consciously aware from the propaganda and so forth, and even just the issues that go on in our own communities, right? Because at this point, I really believe that because we are immersing ourselves in African American history, at this point in time, it's so important to start taking that knowledge and information and no longer going outward in the world telling white people what they're doing wrong, but looking to the spaces in our community to educate those who are upcoming, and those who are around us. I think anything outside of that in regards to African American literature is a waste of time. And let me tell you why. It's a waste of time in the sense of we're taking information, we're learning about these historical pretenses, but we're not applying it to the future today. Thus, we're stuck with bitterness, anger, rage, and we're feeling defeated over what our ancestors had to endure in this country, while simultaneously being negligent to all they had to endure, all they've pushed past, and everything that they fought for. So we're kind of like, we're stuck in a sense, essentially. It's like a math problem, and it's like you don't really know how to solve it. So that's the problem. I would say that that's one of the things that just kind of like, it's not going to push us forward if we don't take what we've learned and apply it within our own communities. Now, sorry y'all, Bruce is being like so extra right now. I don't know why he's barking so much. Okay, yeah, so moving forward, so those traits are not seen as desirable. And when you think about how many people sometimes sabotage, or I've seen for myself, people who are educated and so forth, and they're a Black guy, colorism is a real thing. So let me just throw that in there. Depending on the color of his skin, you'll find him still kind of juggling between this rugged bad boy persona, kind of like wannabe, or being this stand-up guy that he really is, because it's not something that's praised within his community. And he too, or she may, right, desire Black love, Black admiration. And it's not really a matter of like community, I don't think, all the times, though I do think that plays a role. I think a lot of it is just like self-love. You know, it's like, wow, this is who I am, but this is who I am. But it's like, this is who I cannot be in society. Like, I'll never be defined as this, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not desirable, essentially, you know, and that's tough. Like, that's a very tough thing. And so I think, you know, looking at it from a practical standpoint, I think it's something that we need to assess. I think it's something we need to look at. And, you know, I talked about like rap culture and so forth, and just the commodification of what Hollywood has painted ghettos out to be. It's kind of like this fantasy, right? Like you see people in the music videos, right? These white, kind of like, I'm gonna say close to white looking artists, and they go to the hood, they glamorize it, they make it this thing where they're like the main one in the center, and like everyone's rapping around them, and it's just like this big thing. And it's really funny because it's like, no ghetto is like that, you know? But it's like, when you've never been, all you have is the Hollywood producers painting this stereotypical picture of the ghettos that they've created, but they've never been in, right? And so it's really funny just to kind of see Black culture depicted in the media, and how it kind of is permeated throughout the industries, especially the entertainment industry, and how people are able to commodify that, you know? And it's just hilarious. And so when we talk about things like cultural appropriation, it's just one of those things really where people are saying, hey, this is the nitty gritty of what Black people have been given, and they went off to make something really beautiful with it. But it's like, oh, this is a problem, because I'm not getting paid for braids. I'm not getting paid for having long nails. I'm not getting paid for, you know, the way that I talk, right? If I'm using slang, or if I'm just, you know, hanging out with my girls, or whatever the case may be, I'm not getting a check for that, right? Or you see the women who are getting a check for that. And a lot of times in these industries, it's exploitation, right? It's more so like, okay, we're going to pay you, but you're going to play into this hypersexualized Black woman. And that goes again to the rape and all the things that Black women experience at the hands of slave masters and so forth. So it's just like, you see, there's a lot of frustration there. And I think for me, the reason why I never wanted to get into politics is because I think it's just way too much gray in the middle there. And I think that it kind of creates this false sense of like division, and people just kind of want to just be like on one, you know what I mean? I don't know. I just think that I don't want to speak too much on politics, but I would definitely say for me, a lot of times being boxed in kind of has a very interesting way of stifling the brain, and it doesn't really allow you to consider the complexities of life and expand beyond what you know. Now, it's not really a matter of like being too open-minded, because I definitely think you can be a little too open-minded. Sometimes if you're in a space where you're a little too open-minded and you're not really firm in like where you are, which again brings me back to another point about social media and just kind of how the dangers of it, especially in the minds of our young children. You know, at these young ages, you know, your adolescent years and so forth, you're really forming who you are as a person. Like, you're developing your personality and so forth. And I'm really saddened because I just don't think that young girls, young guys, they don't have the ability to do that anymore. You know, the individualized personification development stage, right, of like adolescence is like out the window. You know, when you're young, you do want to be liked. You do want to have your friends. You want to have people who are like you. But now, because there is just kind of like this mass appeal for popularity, and there are just a lot of kids who are just kind of in this really, really narrow space where it's like, okay, I'm this one-off kid who, you know, mom has a bedtime, or dad, you know, my family has a bedtime or whatever, and you're hanging around people who are like, you know, showing up to, you know, 6th grade class with the bust down weaves and the wigs and like all these different things. Like, that's a very tough space to be in. And that's why my work is always so centered towards the youth, because I just think that they're so impressionable, and we have so many impressions and narratives and things to be pressed upon. It's really concerning. So I would say my biggest thing has always been being mindful, being aware, of course, and, you know, just making sure that I'm not necessarily being tainted. And I would say that's the grace of God. And when I say being tainted, I mean losing hope and faith in the future, because I just think when we speak such negativity and death over the future, we speak death over the future generations, which I think is very dangerous, and we shouldn't do that. So, you know, for me, I try to be mindful of like, what am I speaking and what am I sharing and what, you know what I mean? That's why we talked about college and so forth. And, you know, it just being one of those things where I just think one thing I'll close with this. There's always going to be negative aspects to everything, you know, but right now I think that negativity has become one of the most marketable and high-selling aspects of everything, you know, and it's very interesting. It's become one of those things where a lot of people are literally being compensated. And then, you know, my concern outside of that, like the negative realm, is that people are being, you know, just really in spaces where they're not really able to share their truths, and they're not really able to be themselves, because we have such this linear path, right? And then it's like you're either on this side or you're on this side in terms of like politics and stuff like that. It's like, I don't know. I just don't think that we've really given people the space for self-expression. And I think a lot of people are kind of trying to like find ways through that. I would say that from my own personal experience, social media is not the way. It's just not the way. I think that there's something empowering, you know, about sharing your story, especially with the intention to liberate others. But I don't know. I just think it's one of those things where you do what you want. Can I just say, you do what you want? It's your personal tailoring and like what you feel like would set you free in your life and in your path. But I don't know. I'm going to leave it there, because I try to, especially at this day and age, I really try to just speak from my observation and my experience. Like, I don't really want to be the person who sets out and tells people how to live their lives. I'm going to tell you what worked for me. I'm going to tell you what I'm observing and where I think that we can make some corrections. But I just think it's one of those things where I think what we need now more than ever is more love. I think we need more love. I think we need more nurturing. I think we need more understanding. We need more compassion. We need more peace. We need more forgiveness. And I think that we need to just kind of approach people in a more godly way, to be honest. Like, I just think that right now we're just in a space where a lot of people are just like chewing people up and spitting them out, all in the name of truth. And, you know, when you hear certain people talk about how God's truth is the only truth and so forth, it's one of those things where at first you may look at it like, oh, that's just very, you know, narrow, and that's not, you know, God made us all individual and so forth. And that's true. But the dangers of that, in which I completely understand why a lot of people are saying like, hey, let's just be mindful of God's truth, is because people are literally getting online and they're just acting and behaving in such ways to where I think we just kind of forget that like people are human. And I think it's okay to have your opinions. I think your opinions matter. Like, my opinions matter. Like, you know what I mean? It matters. And when you have a podcast, especially, you feel very empowered to be online and to be like front and center. Like, it's a very empowering thing, you know, like you feel like, okay, I have a mic. I know that there's a certain influence that comes with this. I feel seen. I feel heard. You know, it's a very respectable kind of like position, but it's just one of those things where it's like, I don't think that a lot of times we are considerate of the deliverer. We're not getting, especially when we do, you know, we create content and we're talking about a specific person. And I'm not saying that, you know, you do what you want, right? You do what you want. But I'm just saying that, like, it's just one of those things where I just kind of realize we need to be more loving. I think we need to be more loving. I think we can speak the truth in love. I think that we can speak the truth with compassion. I think that we can speak the truth with understanding. You know, I think that we can speak the truth in a way that can be conveyed without all the drama, without all the projection and bitterness and rage and personal frustrations or annoyances and so forth, you know. But, you know, one thing I will say, I do think that the truth kind of has a way of like waking people up. There's definitely been many times where I felt like I was speaking the truth about something and I'm like, oh, I know this is going to be kind of hurtful. So, you know, I definitely don't encourage anyone to kind of like lean towards, at least for me, I try not to lean towards a space of like, I don't want to offend anybody, because I just don't think that that's possible, you know. To be podcasting for 3 years now, I just kind of realized that like it's just not possible to never offend anybody, you know, like that just kind of taught that. And, you know, that's why I referenced in the last podcast episode, we talked about James Baldwin and Maya Angelou, and just kind of how it's one of those things where once you garner a certain audience and so forth, it can be very tricky. It's a very slippery slope because it's no longer about you, it's about your audience. And that's something that's, you know, hey, it's just something to consider, you know, because I think that we just kind of have a way of taking all of our attention off of ourselves and then focusing it on others. So it's not to say back out. It's not to say don't, you know, work hard and so forth, but it's just something to consider, you know. So deep breaths. I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast episode. Peace.